Yes, I'm about to start. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to welcome you to our next session, incorporating welcoming and inclusive teaching practices in our online courses by Kathy Sint from Colorado Community College and also Kevin Kelly from San Francisco State University. Kevin Kelly sounds familiar to me. Kevin, have you met before? Before we start, I would like to go over some housekeeping items. We are recording this session because not all participants are here today with us, so hopefully they will be able to watch the recording later on. We are using automated Zoom captions during the session, which will be edited before we share them with you to be more accurate. At the bottom of the Zoom window, there's a closed caption button that you will see live script text underneath that button. Select to turn them on or off as you prefer. And please pose your questions using the chat function, and we will share it with our presenters towards the end of the session. We'll also share Padlet and social media addresses to continue this conversation after this session, and also share some additional resources to support your teaching. So I'm excited to listen to Kathy and Kevin about their inclusive teaching practices. Welcome, Kevin and Kathy.
Thank you. All right, so welcome everybody. Kathy and I wanted to tell you a little bit about a series of workshops that we conducted for the Colorado Community College system from August to January in the last few months. So I'll let Kathy kick us off.
All right. So we started this workshop. Kevin was hired to help develop this set of workshops. We did 5 workshops from the fall in the fall of 2021. The goal was to provide instructors and instructional designers and other staff the tools they need to add welcoming and inclusiveness into the online courses for Colorado community colleges. So Kevin and I worked over the summer to develop the Institute, and as Kevin said, we offered it to all members of the system starting in August of 2021.
And the topics that we covered were reimagining online learning with welcoming and inclusive practices in mind, kind of a broader picture, then diving into different aspects of course design and facilitation, facilitating and managing engagement, designing welcoming and inclusive course environments, assessing learning in welcoming and inclusive ways, and last but not least, how do we support our students both through academic and non-academic structures. So this, as Kathy mentioned, involved us as facilitators, instructors, and staff from around the system.
And the attendees that we had 5 webinars that we did, one for each session, and then 5 online collabs that went with the sessions. And the participants could participate in either the webinar or the collab or do both. And overall, we had 96 individuals participate in the webinars and 65 participate in the online labs. Just a note, most of the people who participated in the collabs did also attend the webinars, but there was some overlap and there was some differences. We had 5 who completed all the sessions of the webinars, and 6 who completed 4 of the webinars, 8 who completed 3, and then 74 who completed 1 or 2 sessions. And then the online collabs, we had 28 people who completed all 5 sessions, so they got the certificate for completion. 4 completed 4 sessions, 6 completed 3, and then 28 completed 2 or 1. And everyone who completed the collab, any one of the sessions, got a badge for doing that.
I'm sure the faculty developers in the room are familiar with these types of statistics. So similar to the Peralta equity training that goes from learn to analyze to build, we also wanted to drive the faculty members from awareness to action. So we had them learn different ideas, either participating in the live session or joining us asynchronously asynchronously via the recording. Then they took a little survey that helped them identify growth areas or strength areas, and they could identify 1 or 2 strategies that they wanted to pluck from that particular session to try out in their own class. And in order to help them move towards action, they created a take action plan where they outlined what they needed to implement that strategy, what help they might need from local people on their campus. And then we posted those plans in the discussion forums so that they could get feedback from their colleagues and from Kathy and myself as the facilitators. So what we wanted to do is to basically give you a taste of, we can't cram 5 90-minute sessions into the remaining 40 or 35 minutes left in the session, but we figured we'd do some of the exercises and cover some of the topics just to give you a flavor. So Kathy, kick us off.
All right, so the first activity we are going to do relates to overcoming engagement challenges, and the outcome that this addressed, that was an outcome for our workshop, was how do we make course activities more accessible and inclusive for students with disabilities? And the way we started most of these sessions was to do a little Padlet, and I'm putting the link to the Padlet in the course where you can go and answer the questions. How do we address accessibility challenges proactively? So go ahead and head over to that Padlet, and I will head to that Padlet as well.
Kathy, it looks like that Padlet is private. It can't be edited.
It shouldn't be private. Oh, okay, that shouldn't be private. I will unlock it as soon as it finishes loading.
Kathy and Kevin, if it's okay, I can also share our Padlet for the session, conference Padlet.
So we could use that one too.
Yeah, sure.
I thought I checked this Padlet. Apparently I didn't.
It's in the chat box. Yeah.
So I'll just copy this, put it in the Padlet.
So we'll ask you all to hop in the Padlet, and then Kathy's going to put some prompts in there for us to reply to. Identify accessibility challenges when it comes to engagement, and strategies.
Having trouble getting to my proper Padlets here.
There we go. And for people who are having a hard time with the Padlet, feel free to just pop your stuff in the chat and we can paste them into the Padlet for you. So we see different questions here. Do you know if any of your students require accommodations? So Christina, obviously that's something that students, it's their choice whether or not to divulge that information. Often if they do work through the Center for, let's see, the Disability Program Resource Center or whatever group works with your campus or district, then you would get an official letter at the beginning to share what accommodations are requested. I see other challenges include technology and multitasking, which we all know is also continuous partial attention. Pam wants to know, are we talking about accessibility in general or with respect to getting engagement with the teacher or other students? So yes, Pam, we are talking about specifically right now in different engagement activities in our online courses. What challenges do accessibility raise for that certain scenario? And what strategies have you used to address those challenges? So some of the strategies we see: sharing slides beforehand to make copying of text or clicking links easier. That also helps if we send them to American Sign Language or Maori Sign Language speakers, because they may need a translator or interpreter to know the vocabulary before they show up for the session. DDEM also references language by using more understandable language and more. So we'll hop back to our presentation, and then we'll come back to this Padlet in a little bit for our next.
All
So we'll
right.
share some of the things that we shared with our group.
Right. And one of the things that we mentioned that is important that most people don't think about is if you have visually or hearing impaired people in your class, or even in any meeting, a lot of times there's a simultaneous media channel effect happening where if you're visually impaired or learning disabled, you get audio from the speaker and audio from the screen reader, and that can get very confusing very quickly because you're trying to listen to two people at the same time, or an automated voice in a person. And if you're hearing impaired, trying to read captions from the speaker and read the chat can also get in the way. So you need to think about ways to mitigate that if you need to. And then the big one that we all know about, inaccessible media used in engagement, lack of captions, lack of alternate text, etc., in student posts as well as in faculty posts. So it's not just what the faculty are doing, but it's what the students are doing. So training them to make sure that they're using captions, alternate text, and things while they're working. Moving on, some accessibility strategies before you engage. The big word is prep. I'm sure you've all heard that a lot in the last 3 days. The more prepared you are ahead of time, the better off you are. Check the accessibility of your content before you start using it. One of the things that we told our participants that I think most of them didn't realize, that I suspect since you guys are in an equity conference, you do. Adobe and Office both have accessibility checkers. And while they're not necessarily the best checkers in the world, they're at least a start, especially the Word one works pretty well. And review your captions and transcripts beforehand. Auto captioning most of the time doesn't work great. I don't speak that clearly. I always have to go in and edit my transcripts in my audio. And then the last one I have is provide descriptive text for videos and visuals that convey content that is not provided by audio. I have a great example of that. We were doing early childhood courses, and one of the videos they wanted to use only had music. It showed children doing activities, and they were supposed to analyze the students and what they were doing. There was no audio involved. I had to go in and write descriptive text for all of the visuals that was happening in the video. Some other things we can do: use accessible platforms. Check that before you use them. Connect with the units that support students with disabilities. A lot of times they'll know what they can do to help students. Well, they always know, but they'll also know sometimes if a tool is accessible or not. And then the big one, provide multiple pathways for engagement. And I've seen a couple of the presentations. You people are already doing that, so you probably already know that. All right, some accessibility strategies before engagement. Establish engagement norms that include accessibility. Ask students anonymously, of course, to share accessibility practices and provide guidance working in breakouts. One of the things you can do as part of your assignment is ask students to create unique threads for their titles for their threads. Instead of discussion 1 reply, say discussion 1, my analysis of this, of the paper I wrote, or the paper you wrote, something like that. I guess I got ahead of myself there.
That's all right. Keep going.
You keep students on topic. I said require students to create unique titles, and also ask students to discuss topics from different perspectives. Assign them to roles or ask them to choose a role instead of always maintaining the role they have. That's okay, Kevin. I got behind myself that time. All right, and then lastly, some accessibility strategies for video engagement as a video conference. Provide multiple ways for students to ask questions. Let them use a mic, let them use a chat. I think someone was talking about using reactions in one of the sessions earlier this week. So have them raise their hand if they have a question. We've had people raising hands in our team meetings lately because they don't feel like people are noticing them. And then make sure everyone is muted when they're not speaking. We've all been there. And I have one more thing to add to that we all know. Both WebEx and Zoom now have built-in captioning features, which we are using in this particular webinar. Make sure they're turned on so students can use them if they need them.
Absolutely. And then Christina asked in the chat, when providing multiple pathways for engagement, how is it recognized by the department in terms of the allotment available, as it might require more time or labor? In some ways, it's often maybe more work setting up, but when students participate in different channels, you're still responding to the same number of students, but in different pathways. And we see that more now in things like the flexible course combinations, whether it's hybrid flexible, where students are in the room on Zoom or watching the recording, or some other combination where maybe it's only online remote synchronous and online asynchronous. And if you ask them to do their work in similar spaces, like Dr. Ko earlier today used Poll Everywhere, and you can use that synchronously or asynchronously so that all of the responses are in the same place. And you as an instructor are just going back to it one more time to make sure that you're summarizing the entire class's feedback instead of just the live students. But good question.
And I think there are tools coming up out there. I saw a couple of the conference I was at last week where you can create transcripts and Word documents of things much quicker than you could in the past. So you can provide the second media of engagement without having to spend as much time as you used to.
Mm-hmm. So it was a brief touch of different ways to look at engagement and specifically accessibility around engagement. The fifth session we just did back in January, we pulled in partners from the Colorado Community College System Central Office, as well as some of the colleges, to help us identify ways that we can support students with the relevant support services and resources that are available to them. And specifically, there are a variety of these services. There could be academic in nature. We just talked a little bit about accessibility and accommodations. They could be non-academic in nature, whether that's financial aid or the registrar. It could be health and wellness related, especially as we just heard from Kara Finch's session on self-care and all the challenges of anxiety and mental health that students face. We want to be able to provide pathways for them to get the support they need. And last but not least, technology, which is, we know from the Peralta Equity Rubric, is important to address issues of access, whether students may not have a device other than their smartphone. They may not have access to the internet unless they're going to a parking lot for a Starbucks or a McDonald's. And in some cases, if they live in rural areas, that could be a bit of a drive. So we'll talk a little bit about what we came up with that panel, and we'll start with another Padlet exercise. So maybe to keep things consistent, we can go back to the Padlet that the conference set up for us. So Didem, if you could pop that in the chat again, that would make it easy for people to click the link. And I'll be honest, I'm going to click it too, because I'm sharing my screen and I can't look up there we go. So we'll see you all in Padlet to answer these two questions. What academic and non-academic support challenges do you and your students face? And then what recommendations do you make to students around support? So let's go answer those together. You can see in the top left corner, what academic and accessibility support do you currently recommend, and what challenges do you and your students face? There we go. We see folks are sharing resources like online tutoring services. Challenges include some online students are not local, so I can't refer them to on-campus support. And that was especially a challenge during the pandemic when campuses were closed and students could not find how to get support if it wasn't on campus. Even a phone number would sometimes be difficult to find on the web. So that's a really important point you made there, Anonymous. Douglas says, I always share the links to all the resources I'm aware of. And I usually recommend to faculty to include links to the appropriate resources in the instructions of your assignments, because we can't assume that students are going to go back to their syllabus to find a resource. In a just-in-time situation, we should have a just-in-time help box. Hey, this is a writing assignment. Here's the link to the Writing Center. Hey, here is this. I know that midterms and final exams cause anxiety for students. If you need to talk to a mental health counselor, here's the link to the campus office or what have you. Pam, that's okay. Anonymous is just as good as Pam Nelson because it's your idea. So however you participate is fine. If the student doesn't have official accommodation requests, it depends on the instructor's discretion to provide alternative assignments. That is a challenge for sure. And we can't know unless we are told by that Disability Programs and Resource Center. But that's where we come, creating multiple pathways for students to succeed comes into play. All right, I think we'll hop back to our slides and share some of the things that we talked about with our colleagues from the Colorado Community College System.
As Kevin alluded to, for the support services, we actually had a panel discussion with support service professionals from around the Colorado Community College System. And we asked them some of these questions. And so one of the things we asked was, how and when should faculty reach out to academic or non-academic support staff? And the answer was, you can reach out anytime. They recommended if you want to have someone come to your class and speak, you reach out early so that they can get scheduled. But other than that, we're open. Come talk to us as much as you can.
That is the truth. And then we also asked them how faculty can help students see working with academic or non-academic services staff as a welcoming and inclusive experience. And I forget if this one's my slide, Kathy.
It's yours.
Okay, well, and then again, fill in any gaps, but one of the most important things that was brought up is how to avoid stigmatizing the act of seeking support. And the California Community Colleges Student Senate last year or the year before during the pandemic had a student panel during which one of the students said, faculty should know that the students who most need additional support are least likely to ask for it because they're overwhelmed, or they are not prepared for self-advocacy, or they may be facing imposter syndrome and not sure if they should ask for help. So it's ways that we as an instructors can make it more welcoming and inclusive is to, one, build it into your assignment. So some instructors are saying for research papers, they're creating a task where students have to go talk to a librarian faculty member or librarian staff member to basically go over the ideas they have for their paper, identify sources they can use as ways to support their arguments and so on. But building it into the assignment means that everybody's doing it. And it's not something that students need to feel there's a stigma around. Also creating an element of interest where you might have a we saw in this session with Dr. Hay from City College of New York, someone suggested having a class-wide scavenger hunt. So you could have students going out to the support units and asking questions and bringing those answers back as the responses to the scavenger hunt questions. And so there are ways that we can build it in to make it welcoming and inclusive, but also telling our own stories. If we've sought out support as the students when we were learning, then we can relay those stories to students to say, hey, when I took math, I went to a tutor and I really benefited from it. So anything else to add for this slide, Kathy?
No, I think you covered everything. All right, the next slide, we asked our participants, how should faculty prepare students to get the most out of working with student support services staff? And this question was hard for them, but one of the things that they said was just the main thing is making sure the students are aware of all the services that are available. And as Kevin said, let the students know that support is okay and encouraged. And if they're working with tutoring type staff, to make sure they have what they're working on ready to go and to hand to the staff as they're there. Other than that, this one was kind of a stumper for some of our faculty. So if you have any ideas, we'd love to hear what you think.
Mm-hmm. And I know that, I don't know if it came up while we were answering this question, but the idea of having the students be prepared. So not only, hey, these are the math problems that I need tutoring help with, or the essay that I need help with, but going in with a set of questions, much like we would tell someone who's going to go talk to an oncologist for the first time. You're going to be overwhelmed or maybe dealing with anxiety. And so having a set of written questions so you make sure that you address all of your needs and don't say, oh, I forgot to ask this or that. That's also another way to help students get the most out of that experience. I see here, Max says, be approachable, have staff and faculty who reflect the composition of the community. That is actually so important. We've seen a lot of literature lately and support mechanisms where they make an effort to make sure they have staff of color on hand to support students of color, staff who are open with their being part of the LGBTQ plus community, so that students know that they can go to someone who understands the challenges they face and more. Douglas says, I'm only staff. Please, you are staff. There is no only, and you're so important. You're a part of the whole process and the experience for students. But do regular check-in emails, just thinking of you type. That's amazing. And then Christina says, maybe you could even put some info or suggestion boxes into some activities that were traditionally difficult to remind students that they can ask for support instead of just relying on students remembering it from that first session. Absolutely, Christina. So we know that there were challenges also with students getting help after hours, and it's important for the instructors to know what services are available. In the Colorado Community College system, there were a couple instances where with the technology help desk, they had a 24/7 option for after hours help, but others did have maybe one day a week that they'd be open until 7 p.m. instead of 5 p.m. So letting students know when they can get help from different areas. Sometimes the online tutoring can be after hours as well. So, but the key recommendation here was for the instructors to get to know what services are available and when, so they can relay that information to their students.
And then go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we've talked a little bit about this, but I'll hand it over to you, Kathy, to.
Yeah, there isn't much more that needs to be said with this one. How can faculty and student services staff make courses a welcoming and inclusive experience for students with disabilities? The big one that we use here at CCC Online is use UDL when possible. Make sure you have more than one mode of engagement if possible. Make sure all of your tools that you use and all of the documents you use are accessible. And plan ahead. It's easier to do planning and development work on the front end before the classes than it is to remediate accessibility that's lacking. And I don't know about the rest of the country, but I do know that our disability support staff here in the Colorado Community System is overwhelmed. So if the instructors can make the tools and documents accessible, that saves a lot of work for those who do that for a living.
Mm-hmm. And then in terms of the academic and non-academic support services that faculty may not know about, again, it's just a matter of checking in with the Dean of Students or checking in with the Dean of Undergraduate Studies, or if you're at a community college, your Vice Chancellor or Vice President of Academic Affairs and Student Services, and maybe just checking the website that students would see, but often they're not always easy to find. So just becoming familiar with what your campus or district offers is important.
And
All right.
one other thing I'll add to that is,
Please.
One of the things that the people we talked to said was contact us. We have those resources. If you don't know what they are, we do. So if you contact your academic support people, they have those lists as well. Our support people have lists for mental health help in the town, even if it's not necessarily through the colleges, and they've got those kind of lists as well.
And I actually brought this up the last time we did this presentation. One of the colleges, and I can't remember which one now, in Colorado, has an amazing resource for students who are parents. Letting them know where they can find childcare, letting them know resources related to parenting while studying. So and it was a very large document. And as Kathy mentioned, it mentioned things that are on campus and off campus in the community around the campus region. All right, so we're rounding the bend. We have about maybe 10 to 12 minutes left. And the last area that we wanted to chat about, because we had so many sessions during the conference about alternative assessment and inclusive assessment, we wanted to share what we looked at with respect to assessment with our audience. So Didem, if you pop in the chat our Padlet one more time, we'll go over there just to get your ideas related to how do you normally assess your students' learning in online environments, and what equity challenges arise when you assess learning in those online environments. So everybody click on that Padlet link in the chat. I'm going to join you over there and display things as they pop up.
And the questions are in the Padlet.
Perfect. In the top left corner for those of you who are seeing quite a few great ideas here. So Christina says e-portfolios as an alternative to online exams.
I love e-portfolios.
And then we see equity challenges. Students may have a lack of digital literacy. Earlier, I talked about students may not have access to a device or the internet. Right, Pam brings up utilizing photos and quizzes for geology, the visual requirement, and you can't use alternate text because it gives away the answer. And other fields have the same challenge: anatomy, physiology, anything where you have a complex diagram, and it's difficult to somehow assess students' understanding of that particular diagram if they can't see it. So Kathy mentioned before, the staff at those disability programs and resource centers may have strategies for you, but some of the communities themselves may, OER communities are working really hard to make all their materials accessible. So we'll have to see if anyone in this room now, the 30 odd people, have ideas about how to assess knowledge of a photo when vision is a challenge. All right, so let's hop back and see what some of the things that we shared with our Colorado colleagues. So on the left side, you can see some of the common assessment methods. You shared some of them: quizzes and exams, labs, presentations, discussions, essays, projects. Under other, we can put the meta e-portfolio, which many of these work products could be put into. And equity challenges are some of the things that you all shared: technology access or skill sets, unfamiliar assessment methods for those students who might be first generation college students and are only used to multiple choice tests and essays from their high school or grade school experiences. And so making sure we're being very clear about what we want them to do and how to do it, how to be successful. Bias in assessment language or practices. So sometimes if we're using publisher materials, it might be written from a Eurocentric point of view. It may not take into consideration other knowledge traditions. Giving students too few assessment opportunities. Listening to Dr. Luke Wood do a keynote presentation a couple of weeks ago, he talked about the dangers of only having 2 or 3 really big exams as the only way to assess student learning, which really puts a lot of pressure on those students, and that overemphasis on the high stakes assessments becomes an equity gap. Next, when we're designing welcoming and inclusive assessment processes, we want to provide multiple ways for students to show what they know. We heard Kathy talk about universal design for learning earlier, including low stakes and no stakes opportunities for students to practice, where they might be able to use the feedback from the automated quiz engine to direct them to the pages they should review to get it right next time. We heard Melissa Coe talk about that today. Clarifying expectations and sharing rubrics, checklists, and examples comes straight from the transparent assignment template concept that came from the Transparency in Learning and Teaching in Higher Ed project. We want students to know what they're supposed to do, why they are doing it, and how to be successful. And then providing timely feedback. If students don't get feedback quickly, then often they're not motivated to do the next activity as much because they feel like they're not getting any response from the instructor. And then last but not least, using an exam or assignment wrapper, which is a strategy for us to help students reflect about what they did to prepare for an exam or what they did to complete an assignment. And then they can talk about with themselves or in a journal reflection how it went and what they would do differently next time based on the results that they achieved. So helping students prepare for assessments, again, giving them self-assessment strategies, encouraging them to do their own self-assessments if they need to, possibly through, let's say, digital flashcards or things like that, and conducting review sessions, maybe a virtual work sprint using Zoom or WebEx to allow students to just sit and do their work and ask questions as they arise.
And
then-
Doug made an interesting point in
Please.
the chat about making sure you pay attention to religious holidays, that you don't schedule things during those.
Right. Thank you, Doug, for bringing that up. And then when it comes to clarifying expectations, we can follow the 3 S's here: streamline, include what students need to succeed, but then streamline those instructions to remove unnecessary language. If the instructions have to be long, put a too long didn't read or TLDR summary at the top so that students get the big picture and then they can dive into the details without getting lost. And then, as I mentioned earlier, adding that need help section with just-in-time links is important as well. And then I already mentioned the idea of exam or assignment wrappers, letting students reflect on how they prepared, what they can take away from errors or feedback, and what they would do differently next time. So it's very metacognitive as we think back to the featured speaker. Dr. Sandra McGuire talked about metacognitive equity. So we've got 4 minutes left, and we're so excited that you're all here still with us, whether it's 7 p.m. or later in the East Coast, or 4 p.m. out here in the West Coast, or I'm going to guess 10 or 11 a.m. Christina? 10 a.m. Okay, so yeah, my New Zealand clock is getting better internally. But what questions remain for you all? Again, this was just a kind of a buffet of just smattering of ideas that we shared with the folks in Colorado, but we wanted to give you a taste of ways to think about welcoming inclusive courses for our students. And speaking of students, and I know Didem will probably bring this up in the next minute, but the very next session that's going to start at 3 p.m. California time, and I know it's late, 6 p.m. out east, will be a student panel where we talk to students about the challenges they face related to equity in their classes and what helps them succeed. So we hope you'll join us back here soon. Chris says, as a double check, I share all due dates on the first day of the semester and ask my students for feedback to see if they need any adjustments. That's clever. Reed, yes, we need student voices. We can't just talk about them. We need to speak with and to them. Yes. And so we did it last year. We're doing it this year. We'll do it every chance we can when we have these conferences. Quick question from Susan, creating unique slide titles, is that simply because that makes them more interesting? No, Susan. For people who use screen readers, they can jump from slide to slide based on the titles. And if the 2 slides have the same title, then they don't have a way to distinguish and choose which one they want to visit.
Wait, I'm so sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
That was the wrong question. That was just in the back of my mind somewhere. It was unique titles for threads in a discussion board. That was
Same
suggested.
Same thing. So if you saw those 2
Oh.
pictures, I'll go back. I think we have 1 minute, Didem? Yep, 1 minute. Let me go back to the pictures. Come on. So on the left, you can see every discussion post says synthesis discussion. So imagine you're listening to a screen reader and you just hear synthesis discussion, synthesis discussion, discussion, synthesis, link, synthesis. You don't know which one you're going to click. But if you tell students use 5 or 6 words to summarize your thread, now you can see on the right, reminders to keep me on track. Wolfram Alpha is the way to exit math class. Learning about rocks with purple X. Apple News for keeping me up to date. And so I actually give students 1 point out of 10 for creating a unique title in their thread just to get them in the habit, because it also helps those of us who don't use screen readers. Who wants to have to click into each of all these discussion threads? It's actually a strategy that benefits everyone, much as many accommodation strategies do. But in this case, it really helps those students.
Even
who-
seeing it like that on your cell phone, if you're using your phone to read your discussions, like, which one of those do I want to look at?
Yeah. Great. Well, I know we're at the end of our time.
Yep.
So I'll let the moderator take it over.
Kevin and Kathy, thank you so much. Please take a look at the chat box because we have wonderful comments in the chat box. I really appreciate this session. We always remember, it's always in our mind to make our classrooms, course materials accessible and engaging, but also when we have a session like this, we also realize we have a lot to learn and we have a lot to do, right? And also it made me really excited about this engagement portion of our classrooms, because last year's student panel, this issue came up and students were talking about like how they need more engagement and sense of belonging and interaction with each other as well in online classes. Students shared this experience last year, and that's why it was wonderful to listen to you again, Kevin and Kathy. And hopefully, as Kevin mentioned, we have this year's student panel coming up in 15 minutes, and we're so excited to host that session. So please don't go anywhere, take a break, 10 minutes, 15 minutes break, and come back to listen to our students in this room. Kathy and Kevin, thank you very much again. And hope to see you in student panel. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Great questions and comments.